Hey everybody, welcome to Animate with me, a beginner's introduction to animation in Krita 5. If you're well versed in animation and digital art and you just want the information about how to do animation in Krita, you might want to check out the major animation improvements in Krita 5 video that I've already created. So in this video, it's just going to be something fun and easy to do that doesn't require a lot of artistic skill to make it just fun to walk through the process of learning how to do animation. The intention is that beginners can watch the video and do animation along with me. So pause the video at any time and follow along. Okay, so let's get started. So the first thing that we want to do is create a new file. So I'm going to click on this new icon here, and we're going to create a custom document. So you can choose any size you want, but I'm going to select YouTube HD. And so that's a width of 1280 by 720, and I will click on Create. So here I'm showing the default workspace, and so we'll want to switch to Workspace Animation. So we have the background set up, as you can see, and it has a white color to it, which is okay, but the rest of the layer should be transparent. So we're not going to draw on the background layer, we're going to create another layer to do our animation on. So I'm going to click this plus, and it creates a layer called Paint Layer 1. Now I am assuming that you're familiar with the basics of using Krita, so if you're not, you should stop this video and go look and see some of the other videos that I've done or other people's videos to know the basics of using Krita. Okay, so I'm just going to use the mouse wheel down and press space and move my canvas in so I can just see that whole area there. So if we pay attention, we can see the paint layer is selected, and we show paint layer 1 in background in the animation timeline. But it's very important to understand that right now we have not actually created any keyframes, or this is not an animatable layer quite. Now there's something that you may notice is that there are no brush presets immediately set up in the animation layout. So you need to know that right here you can choose the brush preset here, or if you're familiar with the tool palette here, that I can select whatever brush I want. I'm going to select this brush here, basic size 5, and I'm going to set a color of black. Okay, so if you need to pause the video, go ahead and pause it until you get all set up like this, and then you can continue. Okay, we need to make sure that you're always drawing on a layer that's transparent, so I'm going to actually go to the background layer and hide it. Turn that little eye off so that you can see that checkerboard pattern, so just we know that we're drawing on a transparent layer. Now, Paint Layer 1 is the one that's selected, so make sure that's the case. And you'll see here that this little orange selector here is on keyframe 0, is on time frame 0. So the first thing that we want to do is we're going to come over here and we're going to create a blank frame, and that's clicking on this button right here. So after you've clicked that button, pause the video so that you've got your system set up the same way and you can compare what I'm going to talk about right now. Okay, so what you should notice is that there is a little light bulb showing up here. If that light bulb is not showing up, then you have not created an animatable layer yet. And if you wanted to get rid of that and go back to a non-animatable layer, you can just delete that layer, like up here in the normal layers section, by hitting the trash can, and that layer goes away. I'm going to create a brand new one, so that's Paint Layer 1. It's still named the same thing, and notice that there is no light bulb there. And then I go back here and I click on this create a blank frame, and it will create this light bulb. So that's the very important step. So you may want to take a second to make sure that you've got that light bulb showing up and you have Layer 1 selected. So now we haven't created any drawings yet, but you still can click on this light bulb and you can see that it lights up or turns off. We'll talk about that more later, but I just want you to be aware of that. And then look at your onion skins over here. Yours may be a little bit different setup. If you click on the -2 or the +2 and 3, you can actually turn different onion skins on and off, we're not going to get into that right now. We'll get see that in a little bit, but I just wanted to show you that. So if you're not really familiar with digital art, you may want to pause the video and become familiar with everything that we've talked about so far. And when you're ready, continue. So the animation that we're going to start with is just a little explosion, just because it's a really easy thing to do. Alright, so the first thing that we're going to do is we make sure our marker here is on that first frame. Notice it's got these slash marks in here, so a frame has been created. And now I'm just going to scribble a little mark there that's starting that explosion. So go ahead and do that, and pause the video and do that. Okay, now that you've done that, let's come over here to this expansion menu here, and there's a little icon over here that looks like a tablet that somebody's drawing on. We want to make sure that it says auto key blank. That's what we want to do, because what's going to happen is as we draw each new frame, we want it to erase the old one and create a new one. So make sure auto key blank is set. So for the rest of the video, I won't keep saying when to pause. Just pause it whenever it feels good. So now what we want to do is we want to come over here and select another frame. I'm going to skip one frame and go to the frame 2. We can see that marked here to telling us we have frame 2. And we have not created a new frame. We're just going to draw. You could create a blank frame and then draw, but because we set up here that it will auto key that, we're just going to draw. So I'm going to now make this explosion look like it's gotten a little bigger. So I'm just going to start here and make it a little bigger. And notice then it clears out that other drawing. And we'll repeat the process. We'll click on frame 4, make the explosion a little bit larger. Let's do 6 and continue that process. Okay, so now let's take a look at something here. So as I'm drawing this explosion here, I may want to have some internal parts there, but the question is, where should I draw this other one? I could just draw it anywhere, but I could also find out a little bit about what I drew before. And the way I can do that is with the onion skin. So I'm going to go to the light bulb here and turn that on. So go ahead and do that on your system. Now notice if you look over here to the onion skins, we only have one frame behind. So 0 represents wherever you are. Now I'm going to drag, so I put the mouse cursor at the above the timeline where the numbers are, and I can drag around, and we're scrubbing through. It's called scrubbing through the animation line. And I'm going to stop here on frame 4, and now you can see there's a red one and there's a green one. And there's a black one as well. So notice here that I've got selected one frame behind and one frame ahead. So the red one is the previous frame and the green one is the next frame. So at the frame at point 4 is the black one, and the keyframe at point 6 is the green, and the keyframe at point 2 is the red, and so we can see that. Now I'm going to come to 6, and so maybe I want to draw something similar to where that red one was. And so I'm going to just take my pen and draw right about where that red area is. And let's just continue that process for a couple of more frames. So here we are at frame 8, and I will make this larger again. And again, it's drawn between, so maybe I'll draw in between those. And maybe even a little one down here. Okay, now I could continue that process for each frame until I finish whatever I want. Let's now have this explosion kind of recede the other way. So it exploded out big, and now it will go back small. And we'll do it a different way just to show you some different things within the animation timeline. Now, one quick thing that I'll point out is right here above this timeline, we've got a gray line up here, and that's just showing you the images that are what's called cached, and that means it's loaded up into memory. That's just a thing that if you want to know the performance of your computer, what's going on, it's just showing you that. It's not necessary in order to do the animation. Okay, so I'm going to go to frame 6, and I'm going to copy that by doing right-click, copy keyframes, And now I'm going to go to frame 10, and I'm going to right-click and paste keyframes. And so what we see is that 6 is the same as 8, but it gives you that appearance of exploding and then trying to recede as well. Now I'm going to go to frame 4, and I'm going to right-click, and this time I'm going to choose Clone. Now Clone is like Copy, but it's not the same. So let me go ahead and paste there on frame 12, and we actually find out that if you look here at frame 12, it's got hash marks, but so does frame 4. What this means is these are the exact same images, whereas 8 is a copy of what's at 6. It's not the same. So I'll show you what that means after we look at the scrubbing. So let's just look at the scrubbing for a second. Okay. So I'm going to go to 4, and I'm going to make a little change. I'm going to turn off the onion skins for a second. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw on frame 4. A little bitty mark there. And what you'll notice when I scrub over to 12, it's the same. So a change in 4 resulted in a change in 12 because they're clones. Let's go to 6 and do the same kind of thing. I'm going to put a little bitty mark there. Notice that 6 and 10 are, 6 and 10 are not exactly the same. So the mark is here on 6, but it's not 10, even though the rest of it is exactly the same. So that's the difference between copying and cloning. Okay, so pause the video and rewind it if necessary to make sure that you understand what we've done so far, and then pick up and we'll continue the process. Okay, so at frame 2, I'm going to copy that keyframe and paste it at 14 and take the one at frame 0, copy the keyframe and paste it at 16. Now if we scrub through, we have kind of an explosion here. Okay, so let's just assume that that completes our animation there, and I'm going to press the playhead here. And you'll see it just keeps going for a long way. And the reason is because we haven't set when it's going to stop. And by default, we have it starting at 0 and stopping at 100 frames. That's not 100 seconds, that's 100 frames. And we have a frame rate of 24 frames per second. So this is just a little bit more than 4 seconds because there are 20 frames per second. So what we want to do is have an animation that's explosion, and just pauses here. Oh, maybe we should have the explosion completely go away. So let's enter an empty frame here. Okay, so we have an explosion, and then for a couple of frames we have nothing. So we'll stop at 24. So I can tell the program that's the end of the animation by coming over to here, and I could set the clip end, or I could also right click and say set the end time, and it will mark it there. And notice that that bluish color went away. And so now I can press the play, and we can see it loops through the explosion, and we can repeatedly see what's going on. Okay, now that we have a nice little animation, we want to output that animation. So let's go to File, Render Animation, and it will bring up a dialog, and you probably have it showing image sequence. Mine actually has video because I've installed this. So you can output as an image sequence or as a video. Image sequence is used for more professional animations. You use compositing software and things like that. But for basic, especially amateur or when you're first starting with animation, you may want to do video. And so we can click on that, and you probably don't have this FFmpeg, so we have to install that before we actually render the animation. So let's cancel that and go to Help and bring up Krita Handbook. So in the Krita Handbook, we want to open up the reference manual, not the user manual. And we want to scroll down to render animation. And then when we get to render animation, we want to scroll down until we see render animation, and then scroll a little bit more to where it says setting up Krita for exporting animations. So you'll need to follow all of these steps in order to set up your FFmpeg. And so once you've unzipped the FFmpeg into a location that you set up, you make sure that you're aware of where you put that, and then that brings us to that dialog we were just looking at. Okay, before we bring up that dialog, we want to make a couple of changes. First of all, remember that the background is turned off, so we want to turn that on. Let's scrub through and you can see that explosion. If you don't turn on the background, the transparent pixels will show up as black, so it'll just be a black image because we drew in black and the background is black. So we make sure that all the layers are on that we want to be turned on. The next thing we want to do is check about the frame rate. So right now we've got 24 frames that we're rendering, and we are doing 24 frames per second. So that will be a 1 second animation. And that's fine. You can output that if you want. Let's change it to 12, so it'll be a little bit slower kind of animation. Let's even take a look and see what that will look like. So that's what the animation will look like. Alright, now with those things set, we can go to File, Render Animation. And that dialog will come up and we can set video. And now you want to go ahead and have the FFmpeg point to the location where that was installed. I'm going to render as MPEG 4, but there's any number of different types that you could output depending upon your system and what you want. And then the video location, I'm going to have it output in the same folder as where my Krita file is. But you can of course change that. And of course notice that with the frames per second you can change that. You can change the width and height. In first and last frame you can change the number of those things. And I'm going to click OK to render the output. Okay, congratulations, you have completed your first animation with Krita 5. Okay, now we're going to add some more to the animation. What caused that explosion? Well, let's have an asteroid come from the upper right and land here to cause that explosion. Now, you could do this by just drawing frames like we've done before, but we're going to try some other things to explore different techniques within Krita animation. Okay, so let's go back to frame 0 and let's create a new layer that we're going to put our asteroid on. I'm going to click the plus symbol and that creates a new layer. It's called Paint Layer 2. Let's rename it to Asteroid. And just to make things easier to understand, let's rename the Paint Layer 1 to Explosion. So now, to keep from getting confused, I'm going to click on the eyeball on the explosion layer so that it now is not visible. And it won't get in the way of our creating of the asteroid. So I'm going to select the asteroid layer. And remember, we haven't yet made it animatable. So I go and set this back to frame 0 and click on the blank frame. This is probably a good place to pause and catch up. Alright, now we have frame 0 selected. We make sure it's got those hash marks in there. We know we've created a frame. The asteroid layer is selected. And so now I'm going to go into the middle of the screen and create a rather large asteroid here as a kind of a circle. And it can be rough because it is an asteroid. And I'm going to add some circular areas in it to make it look nice and devastating. Okay, when you've got that done, we can come back and I will show you the rest. So notice we're not creating a series of asteroids going from the right to the left. Instead, we've just drawn one. Now what we're going to do is we're going to use the animation curves to actually control this asteroid. Now the way that we're going to do that is we have to create a transform mask. And so I'm going to right click on the asteroid layer and then select Add Transform Mask. And that transform mask is attached to the asteroid itself. Okay, Make sure your asteroid is drawn and you've got the transform mask associated with the asteroid and animation curves is selected. Now we're actually going to create those curves. So I am going to scrub over to frame 0 and I am going to click the plus symbol here to create a keyframe. And notice a bunch of channels. These are called channels here, all these different colors. We see 3 of them, but there's quite a number of them. Those are channels that are controlling the position, the scaling, and the rotation and shear of the object. Now you can control these different channels here by dragging within this graph, but it's much easier to come up here and select this move tool. And all we're going to do is we're going to, actually I'm sorry, I want to select this one right here that has the handles on it. And so now what I want to do is I'm just going to move my asteroid up there. I also want to make it small, so I'm going to press Shift and drag the asteroid so it's nice and small. And we'll put it up in the corner here. So that sets all the points for this particular keyframe, keyframe 0 for the positions and things. Now let's go to somewhere around frame 10. We'll pick frame 10 here, and I'm going to go back and click in this area and drag that asteroid over here, and I'm now going to resize it to make it large again. And let's go ahead and rotate it quite a bit and then move it off the screen. So there we have the asteroid. Now I can scrub through and you should see the results of the asteroid coming in. Now notice that it's coming in fairly straight. It's coming in a straight line. So we're going to talk about that in a second. So go ahead and set up your movement in these channels and then start continue. Now one thing I forgot to mention that I hope you didn't run into was what happens if you have these extra keyframes. So I'm going to create some keyframes that cause some trouble here. I'm going to move this around, and I really didn't want that to happen, for example, and these extra keyframes in there. So how do I get rid of them? Well, first of all, I can come in here and I can click on these buttons here to try to get things to fit in with what I see. I can also drag on the scroll bar. If I go up and down, it will zoom in and out. And I can actually drag it to the left and right as well. In addition, I've got these buttons that I can drag on. So I can change the scale of things so that I can see everything. I can also drag within this area here where the numbers are so that all the channels fit in an area that I can see. So now you may think that I can drag select to get rid of those keyframes, but I can't. So there's another way that we can do this. In this particular case, all of the keyframes at frame 4 and all of the keyframes at frame 6 are ones that I don't want to be there. So I can select all of the keyframes at this frame by double clicking on any one of these dots. So when I double click, they all turn white, showing that they're selected. And then I can click on removing the keyframes. And so those keyframes are gone. And I can do the same thing for here. So I double click and remove those keyframes. So now all of the intermediate frames are gone. Now, when you're first starting, it's not a good idea to actually manipulate these individually too much, except for maybe to add them and remove them. We'll talk about Bezier curves in just a second. But in general, you want to try to use the tools to move things around, like I was saying, the selection tool. But I also will show you, you can actually manipulate any one of the channels by itself. So right now, all of them are visible. But let's say that I was only interested in seeing what happens at the X position. I can press Shift and click on that eyeball, and all the other channels go off. So we can see that this red line is the thing that's controlling the X position. If I click on the Y position, now we can see notice that it's green, even though it's not the selected position thing. We can see that it's the one that we're visually seeing, and that's controlling the Y position. Also notice that Y position, the way it works in Krita, is that 0's at the top for Y and positive Y is down. So now that we're talking about the Y position and focused only on that, let's talk about the Bezier curve. Let's look at what happens as I scrub through the timeline. We talked about it goes straight from the top right to the lower left corner, and that's okay, but we want to make it look like it's curving in a little bit. And the way that we can do that is we can change this to a Bezier curve interpolation. So I'm going to click on this first point and then click on the Bezier curve interpolation button, and the point will become a circle that I can drag out. And as I drag it out, notice that there will be some curvature, and I can change the curve of that line, but as I scrub, you'll see the behavior, it seems to curve in to that point. So I just adjust it however I want. That makes it look the way that I'd like it to look. Okay, so make those changes in your file and then continue. Okay, so now we notice that we're around frame 10 is when we want to disappear, 9 or 10. So I'm going to go back now to the animation timeline, and instead of marking the transformation layer, I'm going to click on the explosion layer. And we're going to now show that up, and as we scrub through we can see that explosion is happening before the asteroid hits. So what we want to do is we want to move all of these keyframes to the right. Now one way that we can do that is we can drag and select them, and I can do that either by clicking on the first one and then shift clicking on the last one. Another way that I can do that is to drag select. The thing I want to be careful is I don't want to start my selection on a frame that has a keyframe on it. So I want to start with an empty one. And an easy way to do that is to start with the background, because I don't have any keyframes there. So I'm going to start dragging and select all of these keyframes. And then I will drag select the whole section till we get to about frame 10, because that's where we had it, the asteroid. So now what we can do is I can drag along the top of the timeline and see what it looks like. And so maybe I want to drag those a little bit earlier, whatever feels appropriate for your animation. And remember, we can set the end of the animation, so I can right click here and oops, I want to select one of the timelines, not up top there, and I'm going to set the end time. So now let's go ahead and see what it looks like. There's our animation. And don't forget that you can adjust the frame rate. So let's bump it up a little bit to make it go a little bit faster and see what that looks like. So make the adjustments as appropriate that you like. Okay, so let's make a couple of more changes as we think about this to show some other attributes of the animation. So let's color in the asteroid. So we want to go back to the asteroid, and notice that there's really only one keyframe right here, the first frame here, but notice as we scrub along, it changes the size, and now it's kind of up in this upper corner, and I don't really have access to the whole thing, so I don't want to scrub to a different keyframe, and because the drawing is on frame 0, so how do I color that in now that I've already done some transformations? Well, the easy thing that you need to do is just turn off or hide the transformation mask, and now you won't see the behavior of that transformation. And since I've got the asteroid selected, I can color it in. But there's another issue there, and that is I don't want to color on top of this. What I really want to do is color underneath that. So let's create another layer, and we'll change that to asteroid color. And what I want is that asteroid color to be underneath the asteroid. But the transformation, I want it to apply to both of these things. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select both the asteroid and the asteroid color, right-click, and select Group. And let's do a quick group, so it just groups them together. Now, the transformation mask, we don't want it to be associated only with the asteroid. We want it to be associated with the whole group. So I'll take that transformation mask and drag it up until it is attached to the group, till it highlights the group. And now the asteroid and the asteroid color move with that. And we can show that by going to the asteroid color. And just like we did for the asteroid, we have to create an empty frame so that we can color on that so that it is animatable. And I am going to color that. So now I'm just going to choose a brush that gives some texture. From my favorites, I'm going to choose this one here, which is the Wet Textured Soft, and select a color. I'm just going to choose some purplish color here just to make it interesting. And I can use all the standard tools for drawing and painting, and here I'm just going to give some color to this, a little bit of a texture to it. And of course I can even go into the other asteroid layer and do a selection. On the tool options, I've got just the current layer selected, so I select here, then go back to the color and press delete so I get rid of any of the color that's outside of that selection. So again, I can use any of these tools. So I press Control-Shift-A just to make the marquee go away. Now I'm going to turn on the transformation mask by just clicking on that little eyeball in the transformation mask area, and as I scrub across the top, we see the colored asteroid coming in, and we've got the explosion. Of course, we can go to each of these different layers and add coloring in for those explosions if we want. One other thing to show is, as you create more and more layers, it does use resources, and also these layers, you might run out of space. You can, of course, change that height here. You can also pin and unpin the layers. If I unpin it and I change a different layer, it will seem to disappear. But I can get it back by right-clicking, pin existing layer, and then bring whatever layer is that I want to look at. So there we go. That's the basics of animation in Krita 5, and I hope that you've enjoyed that. If you want to see some other videos about using Krita, you can check out the playlist. I'll put an attachment at the end of this video. So enjoy animating in Krita.